My name is Cindy Hovington, and I'm here today with Mr. Chaz. I'm so excited to speak to him because I'm sure you follow him on Instagram or on TikTok. You have you listen to his podcast, and you know all about him. But if you don't, he talks about so much, everything, in my opinion, that has to do with treating children with respect and learning about ourselves. And, you know, I think I had seen a post once where somebody said they were applying what you tell them with the relationship. And you know what? It makes total sense. So we're going to get into all of that. But before we do, I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about, you know, what your goals are and what your background is. How did you get into this sort of thing that we see now through your podcast and social media? And I know your background is in education, so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes. So I started off as a Montessori teacher in a classroom of about 30 children. And that was a great starting experience. And over time, I was able to get a lot of training. I was able to find a lot of mentors, and eventually found myself really becoming one of the mentors in a school. Not that it was something that I was looking for, but I was just kind of teaching my class, loving, feeling super fulfilled by the impact that I was making on my children, my little community of little humans. And people started to ask me questions like, I see that you have that you are able to handle these things. You have these kids, because they would put like the quote unquote challenging children in my classroom, and they would thrive and be successful. And so people started to just kind of ask me questions, and I remember just casually in the break room just answering, and it was like, what I would do X, Y, and Z. It sounds like blase. I don't remember exactly what I said. It's something to do with sensory, but the teacher came back the next day and was like, oh my goodness, that literally changed my entire day, changed the child's entire day. I need more. And that's when one of my light bulbs went off. It's just like, wow, I love the impact that I'm able to make in this, community of humans. But if I can make an impact on teachers, then my impact can be exponential. And so I became an educational specialist, and pretty much what I was doing is I was teaching teachers to teach. And I was doing 101 million other things, but that's pretty much the simplest, the easiest way to explain what I was doing. I was going inside and outside the classroom, supporting teachers, helping children, teachers, directors be successful, often being a teacher, director, myself, doing observations, all that kind of stuff. And training. So I'd been doing that for a while, and then the pandemic happened, and all the kids went home, all of the teachers went home, or at least most of them. Our schools didn't close, but 99% of the people had left the schools, and the parents became the everything 24/7 for children and for their children. And I saw how they were struggling through conversations I was having with people through social media, and I wanted to find a way to contribute, to help, and to share some of the insights and some of the things that I learned over the years, sometimes through training, sometimes through books, sometimes through the hard way and doing the wrong thing. But I wanted to be able to give back. And so I started to create these videos that were short. And my thought process was, I want to create videos that are, they're short, they are enjoyable to consume, but also by the end of the video, you feel like you've learned something, you feel like your perspective has grown a little bit. And so I started to create those videos on TikTok. That started to grow and blow up. I was doing Q&As all hours of the day. So I very much love this Q&A format. So I love these kind of podcast things. And I started to post on Instagram and Facebook, and kind of just started to grow from there, and then did the podcast so that I could have these longer form conversations that aren't just the bite-size things, the people who are looking for more. And so that's really the short, that's the short version of kind of how I kind of got to where I'm at, and why I'm kind of creating this content about parenting, about teaching. And my goal, really my vision is to, well, my mission rather, is to help adults truly see, guide, and trust children. And how beautiful would it be if, one day we lived in a world where adults really did understand children and understood their behavior, and they were able to guide them in a way that is building healthy habits, as opposed to what traditionally a lot of what we have grown up with, what we've learned, have been not always the healthiest habits. And we have a hard time really understanding children, trusting children.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I got here. And that's what I
already that just that in itself, I already have so many questions. First of all, with your videos, I think you've nailed it. I love also the point of view from the child's point of view videos, because you could see you're taller, you're the adult, and I get that feeling that I am the child. And then you feel bad, you feel bad if you're saying certain things to show other people that we shouldn't be speaking to kids that way. But when you speak in a different way, even though there was one about throwing garbage, paper, and just that one, of the different way of speaking to a child. And I always tell parents that we should be speaking to our children the way that we would speak to a friend, or, an adult, in the sense that they're not less than, they're not out there to get us. They're not out there to make us mad. And I think you have a post about that, about make me mad, it's kind of language. And today there's just so much that I want to talk to you about. You talk about this whole, you said to see, guide, and trust. And I'm just putting myself in the shoes of a parent who's listening right now. And I'm sure, because just with myself, I wish that would have been the case when I was young. That parents would have trusted us, or trusted me, or seen me, and it's such a blessing to hear what you're saying and say, now's the right time. It's okay. Whatever you've done up to now, we're not saying that everything is wrong, but just those 3 words that you said, there's so much love and respect within seeing, trusting, and letting our kids guide us. So we're going to be talking about that today. And we're going to be talking about how the past can impact how we parent. And we'll talk about how we parent right now with our kids. And I'll bring up a few questions that we had from some parents as well. So I don't even know where to begin with all this, because there is a lot to talk about. How about we do look into the past a little bit together, and what are some of the stories, or, parents that you've worked with, or, some conversations that you've had that talk about their past and how it impacts how they're currently parenting. Just from my end, I know that parents will say, if their parents were strict, they can go either way in terms of overcompensating and not having any boundaries within their home, or following what their parents did and saying, this is the right way. I turned out okay. I'm going to be strict. I'm going to spank. I'm going to do it the way that I was raised. So have you encountered the same thing within your community?
Yes, 100%, constantly, all the time.
Yeah.
And, a big one that I've kind of been talking about, and I think everyone's kind of aware. We're not gonna say that everyone's kind of aware, but spanking and hitting children has become something that it's not as popular as it once was when I was growing up. And definitely in different cultures and communities, it's still something that's very popular, something that is expected. But I think we're kind of getting to a point where more and more people are understanding that at the very least, they may not know what to do differently, but I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I don't want to hit my children. Right. And then, that's the first step. And then the next step, which takes a lot of work, is okay, what do I do instead? How do I, correct behavior, help my child through these challenges? What do I do instead? and we can dive deep into that, but something that's not as that I think in the upcoming years, in the next kind of decade, and maybe Gen Z, when they become parents, it'll be like the new spanking, where people will, where a majority of people, or at least 50% of people, will kind of actively try not to do this, and it's shaming.
Yeah.
Right. Shame is something that we have really all kind of grown up with, and just is kind of a way. And even people who are against spanking, I will see them like comment on videos and say like, you don't need to spank your child, you just psychologically manipulate them and make, and that's not healthy either. Right. And calling your child, or like treating them and calling them like bad, and the judgment and the shame is something that a lot of us have internalized, and so we either consciously or unconsciously pass it on. And so when a child, maybe we grew up being told that we were bad, or even, so we'll get into like, quote unquote positive labels. Maybe we can get in that a little bit later, but first let's just start with, calling children like, bad, you're
brat or pest.
Right. And we grow up, and a lot of times we internalize it, and we believe it, and we have this story that we are still telling ourselves as an adult, that I was a bad child. I needed to be put in line. I needed to be hit. I needed to be shamed and felt bad, as opposed to helped understand what was going on with me and helping me work through that. And so that happened to us, and kind of like you said, it's like, oh, like that's why I stopped being a jerk to so-and-so. That's why I stopped hitting so-and-so. That's how I started to do my homework, or whatever it was that your parents were trying to get you to do. And then it's like, okay, so it worked for me. Now I'm going to use these same kind of judgments and shame towards children. But then what happens a lot of times is that, one, children internalize and believe the label and believe that they are bad, and that can have varying effects. One of them can be, me being an example of kind of leaning into it. Like I was the defiant child, and that's kind of how I was labeled. And after a while, when you're labeled and you're shamed, you kind of, it disconnects you from the person who is shaming you. It harms that relationship. You feel misunderstood, and you also sometimes lean into it more. Like, well, since I'm defiant and I don't listen, then I'm going to show them how I don't listen. Like, I can't listen, right? Like we believe that story, and a lot of times we'll embody it and lean more into it, as opposed to saying, you're having a hard time. You're doing the best you can with the skills you have, and you're having a hard time in this situation. Let me help you through that. Let me help you understand your emotions. Let me help you understand how to work through those emotions. Let me help you understand how to solve that problem that you're having, whatever that problem is. And a lot of times
can a parent say what you just said and go through that if they don't know how to do it for themselves? Right. So if they weren't raised that way, how can a parent, what can a parent do right now? So I'm just thinking of somebody who's listening and saying, I'd love to say what you just said, but I get to the point where my child hits their sibling and I'll yell, I'll scream, I'll say names and, punish them. So how do we get to the point of saying what you just said?
You have to do the work. You have to do the self-work to learn, grow, and develop yourself, so that you do have more of a capacity to practice these skills, to model these skills, to guide them in these skills, because you're 100% right. Like that emotion. So likely what happens a lot of times is a child has something happen, something triggers the child. They have this big emotion as a reaction towards whatever that trigger is, whether it be stopping screen time, whether it be not having this
Sharing,
snack,
yeah,
or sharing, or
yeah,
getting the toy, or
yeah,
whatever it is, right? There's this trigger, and then the child has this big emotion. The child doesn't know how to navigate that emotion. Emotions are new to them, and also they can't label their emotion. It's just this thing that's inside of them that is so powerful, that feels overpowering, and they will react in their emotion. And so that reaction might be, someone might call it a temper tantrum, but it might be throwing themselves on the floor, or saying no, or I don't want to, or whatever it is. That is their reaction. That is those are the skills that they have to handle that situation, right? And so then by that temper tantrum, the throwing on the floor, the no, whatever, that then triggers us, and triggers our emotions, and then we have a tendency to react to and use whatever skills we have. And our skills might be hitting, they might be yelling, they might be, shaming. Like those are the skills that we have in our toolbox. And so that's what we're going to use. But what it takes, if we want to teach our child to respond and to react differently in these situations, we have to learn to react differently and respond differently to them, right? And when we have that reaction, you're going to have that initial reaction in your body. You're going to feel something. You're going to be triggered. It's going to happen. The goal isn't to not ever feel a trigger, to not ever feel the emotion. Like the emotion's going to happen. It's healthy. It's a signal from your body. Like it's not a reason to run away from the emotion. You're going to feel triggered. But the goal is to acknowledge it and to be aware of what you're feeling, and to maybe, if you're feeling frustrated, to acknowledge, I'm experiencing frustration right now. I'm feeling frustrated. So this isn't going the way I expected, or this isn't going my way. And so I'm feeling frustration. I'm experiencing frustration. Acknowledging that with experiencing a frustration or anger or sadness, that we're going to want to have a reaction. Maybe it's to hit, or to shame, or to whatever. But now that we've acknowledged that we're aware of our emotions, aware of how we're feeling, and we've expressed it, even if we're not saying out loud, it just even expressing it to ourselves, even just that first action releases some of our kind of like the stress in our body, and that big emotion, to kind of help us regulate a little bit. And then we can take it a step further, and we can breathe, right? And breathing is such a skill. Like it's not like, for some people like out there, you'll probably hear is like, breathing, like breathing is a skill, right? And so like, just to say like, oh, like I tried breathing and it didn't work for me. Like it's a skill. Like it's not something that you just try one time and see if it works. It's something that you work on, right? And so you breathe, you regulate yourself, you regulate your body, and then you tell yourself, like, I have a choice here in how I respond, right? And hopefully at this point, you're a little bit more regulated. You're aware that you're triggered, your emotion, you've regulated how you're feeling. So you're not reacting or just yelling. You're able to access a little bit more logic and reasoning, and you're more able to think through what is actually going on. And to use more of the strategies and tools that you've learned on this podcast, or from social media, or from books. And now you're actually more able to use those tools because you're more regulated, and you're not just reacting with emotion, which is the same thing that we are wanting the child in this moment, when they're triggered by, ending a screen time, not having snack, the toy getting taken, whatever it is, that's the same thing that we want them to do, right? And so it's not easy, and so it's not an easy thing an easy thing to do. And if we're struggling with it as an adult, that's an opportunity for us to be empathetic toward a child who is just learning this, right? A child with not a fully formed brain yet, right? And us with our fully formed brains still struggle with this,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? And I'm going to kind of wrap it up here because I've been talking for a while.
No.
But I can choose how I respond in this moment. Pull together your tools and your strategies, and then you see the behavior as communication. You see it as an underlying need that they're expressing. You see it as a missing skill that they have to be worked on, and you approach it from there. And from that place, you can say, you're having a hard time trying to solve this problem, whatever it is. You're having a hard time waiting. I know that's really tough. And you want it right now. And I said, no, and that's really frustrating. I know, I'm here for you. I've got your back, right? And maybe you're not saying those exact words, but like that's the message, right? I'm here for you. I know this is hard. I'm here for you. And yeah, maybe you do add in some like tools and you talk about when the next, like, you're gonna have a popsicle after dinner. Like, maybe you do use those things, but what's most important is that we're able to regulate ourselves, that we're able to acknowledge that we know what we're experiencing, that we're not just reacting subconsciously, so that we can deal with that emotion, we can work through the emotion, and we can help the child solve the problem, and we can practice skills with them.
A parent asked me if they should start working on the tools, like what you just said, right? The breathing, the creating that pause in between the child's action and your reaction. Can you start working on that immediately without starting the work on your past? Or should they start working on their past first? Because maybe you need to work on that first to be able to get the tools. So they didn't know where to start.
So the answer is work on it together.
Got it.
That you're not going to like just the skills that you're learning. Like this is a lifelong thing. This isn't just I've got the skills, now I can teach them, or now like I'm done with the work. Like it is an ongoing thing. It is a lifelong journey. And so you want to be learning the skills and teaching the skills at the same time. And when you mess up and you make a mistake, or they make a mistake, you give yourself grace, you give them grace. You said like, it's okay. Like that's part of the learning process. The mistakes, the mess ups, the oops is a part of the learning process, right? It would be like expecting your infant to learn how to walk without ever falling down. It'd be like expecting your child to be potty trained without ever having an accident. Having that unrealistic expectation that you're not going to make the mistake, or that perfection is the goal, is going to be, it's going to hold you back from actually learning and growing and improving. So the answer is both. You learn and you go on the journey together.
I love that. I think there's this sort of misconception when it comes to discipline, where discipline is, I don't know how I would word it, how people think, but it's teaching. Discipline is not about, yes, we're teaching them right and wrong, but we're doing it through teaching. That's the whole point of discipline. Whereas when I think back to our generation and my surrounding and the way I was raised, it's what I say goes. There's no discussion. And now with this whole, what we hear about positive parenting or responsive parenting, all those terms, for me, what I see is in the literature and in science, and what we see is a type of parenting that balances boundaries and empathy or connection with your child. That is clear within all the studies. Like, it's not about, there's this misunderstanding also, so with the discipline, but also this positive parenting, that it means we just let everything go and that we're their best friend and that we don't have boundaries. And I wish that parents would know that, both the discipline part where you have to teach them something. Yes, if your child is hitting their sibling, that is wrong. We want to teach them that. But by putting them in a timeout, and it's not that a timeout is wrong right now, that's not the point of the discussion, but let's just say you put them in a timeout. And what did you teach them? Are you taking the time to sit with them? Are you just yelling at them? Are you whatever it is? But then in addition, if you're saying that you're following positive parenting, it's not about letting it go and saying nothing about it, right? So there has to be this sort of balance, and everything comes back to that connection or empathy and the boundaries. We have to balance both of those, and that's something you talk about as well, right? So how, again, and it always falls into attachment. So if a child, let's say our generation, and we have kids, and we didn't create a strong attachment with our parents because of the way that they were parenting. And now we're being told, parent this way, in a positive way, in a way where you're connecting with your child, discipline in a way where you're connecting and you're teaching and whatever it is, but we don't have the skills. And our past plays into this. So maybe it goes back to what you were saying, where we have to do the work, and we have to do that kind of work to start off with and get the tools and the skills. But I guess my whole question with this whole point is, what can we be doing right now as parents, in addition to what you're saying? I know that you said start off with balancing everything, but I'm assuming from what parents were telling me that they really have no clue where to start, and they're overwhelmed, and they're yelling a lot more than they wanted to in the past year. And sure, they're listening to all of our podcasts and all our social media, but now what? What do they do with this? All this abundance of information, right? Like, where do we start when it comes to this parenting thing and discipline?
Yeah. So it's always going to start with relationship with relationship. And as I kind of said earlier, I break it down to kind of like 3 main components, right? Seeing, guiding, and trusting. And let me talk about that for a minute, because I think it will kind of answer the question, because it's not necessarily, I think, if you're talking about what specific, like what strategy, what tool, like where should I start with my learning how to discipline, I think that would be different and would be determined on what your need is and your family and your child. And so I think that is kind of a case-by-case basis on what exact strategy or tool to start with. But starting with understanding, seeing your child. When I say see your child, I mean really seeing their behavior as communication and understanding what they're communicating and being able to communicate back. I would start there. And both of those parts can be hard, because we've been conditioned to see anytime a child has an emotion, like they are an inconvenient brat or whatever it is. And so it's a little bit of rewiring our own brain to see it differently, to see behavior as communication. And so what I would say, if I were to dig deeper, so like, okay, like can I look up, or what can I Google search? If there's a behavior that you're seeing that's concerning you don't understand, you can start with this simple, I don't know if I would necessarily trust everything that I see on Google, but it may be a good place to start of just like, what could be the potential, what could they potentially be communicating with this behavior? And not every behavior is going to be the same thing. Like hitting is a behavior, but they could be hitting for a variety of reasons, right? Are they hitting because they don't know how to get their toy back? Are they hitting because they're trying to meet their need for connection, and they know if they hit that an adult or the caregiver is going to come over to them? Are they hitting because someone is in their space and they don't know how to, like, hey, I'm overwhelmed, or is it a sensory thing? Like, trying to really observing and to better understand your child. And sometimes there are some things, like I just mentioned like the sensory challenges can help kind of make a lot of things make sense. Like, oh, like that's why like the tag on the shirt was such a big deal. Like I thought they were just being, like a whiny little brat,
Yeah.
but really it was like it was a legitimate, a very, very legit, like it's coming from them having a hard time. And anytime they're having a big emotion, like they're all legitimate feelings, right? But it's very easy for us, especially as adults, to dismiss their feelings if we feel like it's something that's irrational. And if anyone, I know no one's listening to this live, but I'm probably not going to highlight, but I'm having a conversation right now talking to parents and have adults to share all the things that we as adults, get upset about or like have big emotions about that aren't necessarily rational.
Yeah, I was gonna say we have the same responses to weird things sometimes, like it's happened where you're at work and a colleague just like gets upset over nothing or something triggers us, just like with kids, which is why we have to approach them the same way with that kind of empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like just off the top of my head, some of the ones that and maybe people can relate, because you're like, well, I don't really, whenever I'm mad, it's always rational. But like some things that people really connected with are like when you can't find your keys, or you're leaving at the door and your shirt gets snagged on the door handle. Think about how, I made a video kind of talking about how we can respond to, gamer rage. And, it's someone's like, well, their reaction's like too big, like it's too much, but like, think about how big we react to like sporting events, right? And like, is it really that serious? And it was like, yeah, oh no, we're crying. Like, you would think that someone took their firstborn baby. But we have these kind of bigger reactions and big emotions as adults too. And so, just think about sometimes your own, some things that you've had, and maybe thinking about things that have triggered you with your partner might help. But children have these very real big feelings too, and dismissing them, a lot of times, and talking in the conversation about generational cycles, a lot of times we will dismiss and tell them to dismiss their feelings. You're fine, get over it.
Yes. Yeah.
Not a big deal. And it comes with all the best intentions, right? I don't think anyone has bad intentions when they're doing these things. They're trying to help their child be calmed down, but a lot of times we're teaching them, or we're conditioning them to ignore their feelings. And again, like that's not a healthy habit. We want to be able to acknowledge, be very aware of what we're feeling, so that it isn't this subconscious thing that we're just reacting to or holding in and stuffing down until we blow up. Or maybe we don't blow up and it just stays in our body and it creates health problems. We want, we want to teach children to acknowledge, to express their feeling, to express their emotions, so that they can navigate their emotions in a healthy way. And if us adults, if we were better at that, if we had, parents who were really kind of in tune with that and were working hard, even if they weren't perfect, but it was a part of the conversation, at least, we would be better at responding to our children when they're having big reactions right now, as opposed to reacting, right? And like you said, the parents like, I'm yelling all the time. I don't know how to. It's part of it might be because you're not as aware of your own emotions and how to navigate through them. And so on one last bit on the discipline piece, it's not always, when you say discipline is teaching, I think when we say discipline is teaching, sometimes people Like, okay, teaching means sit down and lecture them. Like, no, when
Oh
you're
yeah.
modeling
No.
them, when you're breathing, when you're triggered and you're breathing and you're regulating yourself and then responding and you're validating their emotions and helping giving them language to how they're feeling, like that's teaching, right? It's not necessarily instruction, but it's teaching. And so when you hear discipline is teaching and you think about, a disciple as a person who's the receiver of teachings, like you never heard about disciples getting like hit, like that's not the way that they're learning. Um, you know, part of that is modeling.
Yeah.
There's a
Big
lot of
part.
other things that can be in that bucket of discipline, but part of it is modeling. It's not always, and I would maybe even say rarely, if ever, especially it's never really lecturing when it's a young child, especially. And there is communication, there is talking involved in it, but it's not a sit down and look me in the eye and listen to me for an undisclosed period of time until I feel better about what happened.
Let's remember their attention span is
Yeah.
still short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even sometimes it's like, let me lecture you until I feel regulated or I feel like you suffered enough,
Oh,
right? For the crime and so this is you doing the time. And we can get into a whole thing about punishment and how well they get punished in the real world, they're going to get punished and go to jail. And I mean, we can talk about how like bigger punishments don't actually stop people from committing more crimes. It doesn't actually reduce recidivism. The rate at which people reoffend, what actually reduces recidivism is rehabilitation, which is focused on underlying needs and missing skills, teaching them to meet needs and teaching them skills. So that way, once they're in this situation again, whether it's their neighborhood or trying to feed their family or whatever it is, or in the situation in terms of the kid version of the child takes their toy, they now have the skills, they've practiced the skills, and now they can use those skills to solve that problem.
Right. That can we just touch a bit more about punishment, that topic, because it does come up often with parents as well on my side. And where do you, or what kind of discussions do you have with parents with regards to punishment? Because they might see that as a very important part of parenting, where there has to be punishment so that this is just from what parents tell me, the child has to know that I'm the parent, right? So if I punish them, they'll be afraid of me and then they'll follow me, right? They'll listen to what I say. This is the kind of, language that I hear, not from all parents, but from some parents. And sometimes it's hard to have those conversations because they were raised that way and they want to continue it that way. How do we break that kind of cycle and thought around punishment?
Yeah, man, there's so much to say in response to that. One, I would ask and just reflect on, okay, you're saying you grew up being fearful of your parents. And so that made you respect, like, were you open and were you like super open and honest? And did you feel like you could go to them when you made a mistake? And like, how safe did you feel when like you like messed up? Like, like having those conversations is with curiosity on my part is where I would start. And a lot of people in reflection is like, well, yeah, I guess I didn't feel safe to actually talk to my parents about a lot of stuff. And, I, ended up maybe going to peers for advice and for to learn and to figure out what to do, because you knew if you told your parents, you'd get a whooping or you get this harsh punishment or whatever it was. And so that's the first thing I would say. Second is like on the comment of the child needs to know that I'm the parent, and the only way for them to know that I'm the parent is by punishing them. And let's define punishment real quick, because a lot of people will say like, well, they need to know there's consequences to their actions. And I agree that consequences are important, and talking about consequences are like, that's important.
Mhm.
But consequences, logical consequences, natural consequences, and punishments are different things. Punishments are, the focus is on, I want you did a thing that I didn't like or prefer, broke a rule, whatever. And so I'm going to take something away or hit you or shame. I'm going to make you feel bad.
Yes.
So you
Yeah.
don't do the thing anymore. Right? I'm going to make you feel bad so you don't do the thing anymore. But there's a reason why they did that thing. And so let's say this is the thing about hitting, right? You hit your friend, or you hit your sibling or whatever. And so now I'm going to punish you in whatever form that takes, make you feel bad so you don't do it again. Now, one, punishment, when we're like punishing people, punishing parents or whatever, it also affects us, because our first response tends to be punish you. Punishment, you did something wrong, punishment. A lot of times we won't even ask why. We won't even figure out what was happening to even trigger you for that to happen, for the hitting to take place. So you're punishing them, and let's say they hit because your sister or whoever took their toy away from them. You're playing with a toy, someone took the toy away from you. You didn't know how to get the toy back with the skills that you had available. Except if I hit you, I know you're going to drop that toy pretty quickly, and I'm going to be able to get that toy. That's the skill that I have. Punishment, punish you is like, okay, don't use that skill. And maybe they do, maybe they don't, but they don't know how to solve that problem.
Exactly.
So someone takes their toy back, they've still left that, that whole interaction with you without knowing actually how to solve that problem.
Yeah.
Right. And trust me, they know 99% of the time, like, they know that that's not an acceptable thing to do. They know that the hitting wasn't like what you would prefer. So like, so it's redundant a lot of times when, if that is our goals, like, they need to know that that's not acceptable. Well, they know it's not acceptable. They just don't know how else to solve the problem. Right.
And we haven't given them the skills by punishing them. We haven't given them any tools.
Right. And the other thing that punishment does is that it changes the focus, right? We want the child to see the consequences of their actions on the other person that they just hit, right? We want that. But when we're constantly punishing, and we come in here, and if punishment's the thing, even before we say anything, the focus is on the punishment. And so the focus is only on the consequences of their actions to themselves, not the other person. They're not even thinking about the other person. They're just trying to protect themselves from the punishment, right? And so it's going to be harder to have a conversation about what happened, right? Because they're not going to feel safe, because they're just like, well, how are you going to punish me? Like, whatever I say, like, you're just going to punish me, or I'm not going to have whatever it is. And so it's going to be hard to even have the productive conversation, even understand. If you weren't there to understand what happened, they're going to be more likely to lie about what happened. I don't know why she's crying on the floor. I was just standing over here. I don't know. Like, I'm just been playing with this toy the whole time, right? As opposed to, going in and seeing, and first, like, if there's a child who's got hurt, you go to the child who was hurt first, and you check on them, make sure they're okay. And you can help process. If you don't know what happened, you can figure out what happened, help them process what happened, right? Even as maybe you don't know, maybe even as you're figuring it out. A lot of times with young children, there's some clues in the scene, at the scene of the crime.
That's true.
Where you can figure some things out, and you can, if you do have that feeling of safety with them, they're going to be more likely to tell you what happened. And You can help them process, like, you're playing with a toy and your sister took it away from you and you got frustrated and you really wanted your toy back. So you hit her to get the toy back. Yeah, she's always, and then they'll likely respond, yeah, she's always taking my stuff. I said, no, do you want, yeah, no, in whatever way they're saying. And that's what you want. You want them to be able to express how they're feeling. And so also that's some data for you to understand from their point of view, to see them, to see how they're seeing it. And by the way, maybe you're wrong. And you think it's one thing, and like, yeah, you're really frustrated because you wanted to get your toy back. And like, no, she scratched me first, or
Got it.
I just wanted to play with the toys or whatever. I just wanted to be by myself. Right. And so, so you just wanted to be by yourself. And so it wasn't about the toy, it was about you wanting to be by yourself. Okay. Now that I understand, now I can give you, now we can practice, we can talk about, I can give you tools, we can practice, we can role play, we can read books about it.
Exactly.
About what to do instead when you just want to be by yourself, what to say to your sister or your friend or whatever. Right. And also what to do if that first strategy doesn't work. Right. Okay, plan A doesn't work. This is your contingency plan, which might be like, if you say no, and because maybe the little sister doesn't have a lot of words and isn't going to process, and you say no and you put your hand up and you tell them to stop and they don't stop, it's out of your skill level, and so you can come get me and I can help you work through. And that's also an opportunity to build more skills. But that's teaching. And so now at the end of this interaction, now next time sister tries to take the toy, now I know what to do. I know how to respond to get my toy back or to get my alone time. And so now I know how to meet my need in a healthier way rather than meeting my need in an unhealthy way, which was heading. Right. And so that's kind of an example of kind of, that's discipline, kind of where to start, what to do, how to look at it. And, we were talking about like, past, present, and future. What does that look like long-term, right? And so they're learning how to identify their needs. I'm feeling frustrated or whatever their need is, or identify their feelings and their needs. They're learning how to meet their needs in healthier ways. And so now when they're in a relationship and there's something that their partner does triggers them, now they have the skills, because you've been practicing the skills of expressing, feelings and emotions. Now you have the skills to express how you were feeling and like what triggered you in a healthy way, because that's something you've been practicing your entire life, right? As opposed to what a lot of us do, something will trigger us, and maybe in a relationship or at work, and like some will notice because we're a little off, and like, are you okay? Like, is everything okay? I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm fine. No, I'm fine. No. Whatever. I'm fine. It's whatever. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Right?
Yeah.
Because we've learned to just dismiss our feeling and just say, it's fine. It's fine. We've been told you're fine, get over it. And so now we're just fine.
So you're fine.
And then what happens, but the emotion, we saw this emotion, you're really not fine. You saw this emotion in your body and it comes out, and maybe the next day or later in the day, now they're doing something passive aggressive, or,
it's true.
And then it impacts your relationship. And the same thing, even at work, right? When there's something that maybe your boss is like, okay, hey, I know that you interviewed and you said you're gonna work 8 hours a day and this is gonna be your job description, but actually I need you to work 12 hours a day and you're gonna be doing their job. And yeah, so that's what we're going to do. Oh yeah, the pay raise I said that you would get after 6 months, we're gonna kind of hold off on that. And you're feeling and you're like, okay, this is really frustrating. This is really hard. But your whole life, you've been conditioned to just dismiss how you're feeling. You're going to try to just power through and like, I'm fine. And maybe one day, you blow up and you list all the grievances you've had for the last 6 months. And now it's hard for them to hear you, or or you don't say anything and you're stressed every day and you don't feel safe at work, right? You don't feel safe with the people that you're working with, and but you don't know how to solve that problem. As opposed to, if we learn to identify our feelings and meet our needs and solve problems, and we learn these skills, I can say, hey, can we sit down and have a talk later in your office? Can we schedule some time to talk? Because I just want to be on the same page. I want to make sure that I am meeting my needs as a person, as a parent, as a partner in my family unit, but also I want to see how I can meet the company's needs, because I know the company has needs too. So can we have a conversation where we can kind of bridge that gap? And maybe it's a case where there is no bridging of the gap, and the company's like, no, we work 12 hours a day here, and I'm sorry if you don't do that. Like, this is what we do here. And maybe it's at a point where you're like, hey, maybe this isn't the job or the culture or the company for me. Right. And that's a healthy thing to do. That's okay. Right. As opposed to spending years and years of our lives in places, in these toxic environments, in these environments that we don't feel comfortable in. We're just shoving it all down. That doesn't just impact your present day, your working relationships with it doesn't just impact your day to day, but it impacts your health. Like, we're literally killing ourselves in our jobs sometimes because we don't know how to express our needs in a healthy way.
And boundaries, I would add to that, is a huge thing. I'm 38, and I would say the past year and a half, I've been working on boundaries because for me as a child, I mean, that was never taught as a skill that we didn't, I don't know, that's just, and now I look at my kids, and you brought the example of a child wanting space. That's them learning how to establish a boundary. They're allowed to have alone time. Like my kids, I have 3 kids, and now I've taught the 2 older ones to say, I'd like to play alone right now. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Be respectful of the child, the other, your sibling, and you could say it in a nice way, but you're allowed to go into your room or somewhere else and play on your own if you want to. And I'm hoping that translates to being at work one day and them being told, like you just said, instead of 8 hours a day, you're going to work 12. And they could say, that doesn't work well with what I need right now. And I can't meet you there. I got to meet me somewhere else, 8 hours or, whatever it is. But those boundaries are so important. And there are so many opportunities as a child to teach that.
Yeah.
And
yes. And so like as I mentioned at the beginning, I've worked with, teaching teachers to teach. And so I've had a lot of the conversations with people who, in my role, I had to build relationships with the directors and the teachers, right? And so the directors were, the boss of the teachers reported to the director, and teachers would, because I kind of built that feeling of safety with the teachers, I would hear everything. They would talk about all of I heard all the tea, all the, everything they were disgruntled about. And, and likewise with the directors too. Like I heard the same thing. And it would be so often a director would, ask a teacher to do something. And I know this isn't just in education, this is in every industry where, a boss will, or a leader will ask, someone who reports to them to do something. And the person feels like they have to say yes. And so then they say yes, and then they resent their boss for asking them. But what really was you not really being able to hold a boundary and being able to say,
exactly,
that doesn't work for me. I understand. And maybe there is some level to where I can do some of it, but not all of it. But actually holding the boundary, as opposed to just the people pleasing and just saying yes, just saying yes, and then resenting. And even sometimes, and don't get me wrong, these are lifelong skills to work on. These are things that I also, continuously work on, right? I have this draw to like, I really want to, impact the world and help the world grow and make the world a better place. And, and even in my own want to do that, I still need to be aware of what my boundaries are and be aware of when I'm giving, and when I need to give to myself.
Yeah.
Right. But that takes bringing it back, me to be attuned to how I'm feeling and not just stuffing it down.
Yeah.
Right. So that I know what is, so I know when I need to hold a boundary, when is appropriate for me to hold a boundary, because not everyone's boundaries are the same. And maybe not even the same on every day. But that is a lifelong skill. And last point on this, part of teaching that skill is modeling it to your children, and sometimes holding boundaries with them. True. Knowing that there's going to, a lot of times there's going to be some blowback.
Yeah.
And to expect that and to know that, like, that's, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing a bad job or you're a bad parent or whatever, because they're reacting to a boundary you're setting. And you can model it. Again, you don't have to, you can empathetically set the boundary.
I love that. We've been talking about working on ourselves, and the thing that crosses my mind is we're in this with a partner, or, to raise our child sometimes. And that can cause some issues, because perhaps you want to raise your child a certain way and you have your own past coming into that, but now you have your partner and their past. Something I'll hear from people on my end on for Curious Neuron is, how do I get my partner on board? How, and it's usually moms who are struggling getting the dads on board. It's usually the moms asking me how to get their husbands to stop spanking, or to follow positive parenting or responsive, any of those terms, but the parenting that balances connecting and boundaries. What can parents, if somebody's listening right now, a mom, for example, or even a dad who might not have thought about their past because they're fine and they are parenting the way that they were raised at, or taught to, where do couples begin together in this journey?
With empathy for each other is where you begin. A lot of times, and I'll get those messages too a lot, and sometimes, so I got this message from a mom, and I could feel the energy coming off of the message. When you read a message, you can feel the energy, and it was saying something to the extent of like, how do I get my, partner to use this, brain science research-based techniques, and get them to like know like what they're doing is wrong, and to use the science. And just the way that it was worded, there was a lot of judgment. There was a lot of judgment in it. And I imagine if she's sending this message to me, then maybe there was a moment she was just venting, and maybe something just happened. Like, you never know where people are at when people are sending these messages. But you get the sense that this mom, or this mom is probably judging, or maybe judging this dad, and that's very disconnecting, and that's not going to help. Like, judgment and shame is going to stop the growth. It's not going to help the growth. Curiosity, empathy, connection, like that's what's going to be the nutrients for growth, right? And so starting with empathy, not judging, knowing that they're doing the best with the skills, the knowledge that they have, just like you are. And even with you knowing all of the research or whatever and being really all into the like gentle parenting journey, you're still struggling, right? You're still having a hard time. And so knowing that like it's not just like it, if your partner takes that next step or just says, hey, I do want to do something different, like then there's all this other work to be done. Like that's a big ask. That's a lot. You know, it's not just do it differently. There's a lot of skills, right? You're asking them to like learn skills that they've unlearned, skills that have been conditioned into them from infancy, right? And so it's a big ask. It's a lot. Not saying that it's not a worthy, you know, journey. I think it's definitely, it's a worthy task to try to align, to be somewhat aligned in your kind of parenting and to learn and grow in that area and to help your partner learn and grow in that area. But it's not going to be through judgment and shaming and punishing them and making them feel bad. That's number one. Start with empathy, curiosity, and connection. 1. 2. Now this is going to be, and I don't think I ever really hear anyone talk about this, this tip that I feel like is really valuable, that I feel like is really helpful. Speaking to males specifically. Now, the caveat, the disclaimer here is that this is stereotypical, right? And so it's like, we know that not everyone falls into the stereotype, that there's the spectrum, that not everyone falls into the stereotype. A lot of people do. And in my experience, a lot of people do, and also in my experience, a lot of people switch, right? Men tend to be very logical in their thinking about things and not as emotional. And that's where a lot of times we struggle, especially in those younger years, because children are like 5 and younger, they're like 90% like emotion.
Yeah, emotional.
So like that's part of where I think we kind of struggle a little bit, because we're so far disconnected from that. I think maybe biologically, but also just because society has conditioned us and told us and given us the message that we should disconnect from our emotions, even more than just, I think everyone has heard that you're fine, but you know, males specifically, they get that message and a bunch of other messages where it's not okay to show emotion. If you show emotion, you're weak, and that gets us at a really primal level. So there's a lot of incentive for us to just discard our emotion and dismiss our emotions. But speaking about it in a, like, really diving into the research of it all and the logical, like the science behind of what you're saying, it can be really helpful for the more logical thinkers. And I find a lot of times where the disconnect is like the parent, and I'll even do the coaching sessions, and I'm like talking, I'm like, oh, I'm just curious, like, what do you do for like work? And it's like, you know, they're like an IT or something very like linear and like logical and like ones and zeros. and so that can be really helpful just in terms of like getting the buy-in and just saying, hey, maybe there is something to this. Maybe I am willing to do something different than the way that I was raised. And you know what? It does make a little, and with the curiosity and like empathy and having kind of ongoing and maybe like nightly conversations before bed or whenever you guys have conversations of, you know, like, oh, I hid, and or like this is the way that I was raised, and you know, okay, like, you know, tell me more about that. Like, how did that, like, you did that, like, how did you respond? Did you stop doing that thing again? Or were you just more careful in hiding it? And like, and really, and not in a judgmental way, but just, again, in tone, body language, like it has to feel genuine, right? Which is the same thing that we would, I would recommend for, with your child, like non-judgmental tones, starting with curiosity, which I know is something that you're big on, obviously, curious neuron.
Yes.
It's the same thing.
It really does, that curiosity aspect, even with your child, like you were saying, every time they're acting out, they're communicating something. So if you don't approach it with curiosity, how do you find out what they're trying to communicate, right? So I talk a lot about journaling with parents, but if you're struggling with something, just write down some notes when it's happening. Or even now we're talking about with our partner, I agree with you, that curiosity part is really important. We're not judging them. We don't want to, we just want to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. One last kind of tip on like the how to get my partner on board is, as you're learning and you're growing, like showing the process, being vulnerable in it, talking about your mistakes, talking about your thought process, and doing things, and showing that, this isn't like something that, like, if you do start trying to do, like, it's okay to make mistakes. Like, I make mistakes, like it's a part of the process. And like, and again, it's communicating, like, I'm not going to judge or shame you for making a mistake or not doing it perfectly. Like, I don't do it perfect. Like, like, oh, I tried this, or I was doing this, and I really didn't want to yell, but it just got the best of me, and it came out, and this is what I did to repair, and this is what I did, and just going through the thought process. And so that they can kind of learn and hear and maybe be inspired by the thought process. And it might inspire their thought process when they're doing their own thing. And you may not always see the progress at first. Don't necessarily expect, your partner to run in the room and been like, I tried the gentle parenting technique that you showed me yesterday and it went really well. Maybe some will, but some might not feel that comfort in this new journey that they're embarking on. And they might subtly like share things, and just be aware of that. That sometimes people's process and learning process, it's not always as like, they're not always as out about it. They're not always talking about it. And so that's another thing to keep in mind.
Those are really good points. And I appreciate that you gave this to us, because I think it's a big issue with couples, that they want to know how to communicate and how to go about this whole gentle parenting. So now let's take it for our last question and topic. I think let's take it outside of our home. And I think you know where I'm going with this. Now, if somebody was raised a certain way, and now they are following gentle parenting, and their own parents or in-laws are saying that's not how you parent, right? You have to parent the way that I did. I raised you this way, or I raised, your partner this way, and you turned out fine. You need to do it this way. Whatever you're doing is wrong. You are, becoming their friend. You're not hard on them enough, whatever the language is. So I have two questions regarding, this topic. One, how do we approach that as a parent when our own parents or in-laws are against our way of parenting? And number two, the trust within our own parents or in-laws. If we know they raised a certain way and that caused issues with us now as a parent, how can we trust them with our child? I received a few emails about this, where parents will not let the grandparent babysit, or will move away so that they don't have to deal with it, because they don't actually, that was an email yesterday that I received yesterday. They decided it was too much work. They were arguing too much, so they're hoping the space helps a little bit. But just to say, right? So some parents are struggling with trusting the person who caused the damage, right? How do I put my child in their home? I received an email, it was about a year ago, where a mom was trying to follow gentle parenting, but her parents said, just spank your child. I spanked you. You turned out fine. He's not listening. He is bad. If you spank him, he'll know that he has to listen. So again, a big topic that we have to discuss, but let's talk about parents and in-laws and how do we approach this if they're, let's start with that. How do we approach this if they're against the way that we're parenting?
First, yeah. So first, knowing. So the first thing I want to acknowledge is that can be very triggering for us for a lot of reasons. And just knowing that that's likely going to bring up some stuff from our childhood as we are, as whatever they're saying is probably going to bring up our triggers, our deeply rooted triggers, right? And that may cause us to do a lot of things that we are not necessarily wouldn't do otherwise, right? Maybe we give in and we do, we give in and we do spank or whatever it is. Or we get like just really frustrated. We can't be around them. We need to like just move away. And I don't know if that was, they were living in the same house or if they had to leave the state or something, because those are two different things. I understand the leaving of the house because like, yeah, space, totally get that. But if you had to like leave the state so you can't visit, part of that, what I would say, part of that is that it sounds like we're having a hard time setting boundaries, right? And just to avoid setting boundaries, that we're just going to get out of proximity so that we don't have to use that skill of setting boundaries, right? And we don't have to tolerate those uncomfortable feelings. Now, how do you handle it? One, know what is. So what are the deal breakers for you? So because they're, I think there are levels. Like, are they, if you're leaving them alone, like, are they, if you're afraid they're going to hit your child and that is a deal breaker for you, you let them know like, hey, like this is like, if you are taking care of my child, then this is these things that you absolutely cannot do. And I'm going to hold a boundary on that. And and maybe, hopefully it doesn't get to this point, but maybe, if my child, says like, hey, like you're hitting him, like that's going to be something where we're not going to trust you anymore to be around, and you're not going to without us. Right. And that can be hard too, because so a lot of times they are the support system. Right. And that's the only way that you do the self-care things that you need to do completely away. So that can be really hard. And hopefully you got some friends you can lean on to, or but holding a boundary and letting them know what those boundaries are. And if they cross those boundaries, you are likely going to feel triggered, and you have a choice in how you respond. You can respond kind of, it's one of those extreme things. It's where it's like, okay, like, hey, we have to have a conversation. This is something that we can't do anymore. I'm sorry. I know it's hard. I know you really love your grandchild, but it's a choice that we have decided that we're not going to allow adults to hit a child. Ever explain it. You can be empathetic, do what you got to do. Now, a lot of times I think part of the question is like, what do I do internally? Right. And just knowing that what really matters here, what matters is your relationship with your child. Right. And it really, at the end of the day, like I know it can be hard to deal with, but their judgment on your parenting, it really doesn't matter. It's really triggering. It triggers deep emotions. But think about, like, let's kind of get into and I know I'm talking, let's think about like your mother-in-law or whoever pressured you to start spanking or start hitting your child. And so now that's something you do with your child, and your relationship changes. Or your relationship, or maybe it doesn't change, you don't notice a difference or whatever, but that's going to impact your relationship. I don't care who you are. If someone is hitting you, that's going to impact your relationship with that person. And maybe as they get older, and when they're young, they're little, there's so little that they can do. So we can continue to exercise control, and maybe get away with that for a little bit. And yeah, there's a lot of conflict, but we just up the control or up the threat. And at some point, those threats, like they're not going to be so afraid of us, or they're going to care more about other things and they still don't have those missing skills, and now they're also disconnected from you, and now they're out in the world, and the only people that they can really rely on or they really care about, like in terms of like learning from, or their peers, and peers don't always make the best decisions. and at some point, like, you have to, even if you're not explaining to your child, but explaining to yourself, like, how did we get here? Like, why is our relationship this way? Why am I doing this fear control based parenting? And if the answer is someone else's opinion, that's not going to feel good for you.
No. Yeah.
And it's really not going to feel good for that child, to know that the child was missed out on what could have been a really strong, safe relationship. That's the word I want to use. They missed out on a safe relationship because the opinion of grandma, right? And that may even breed resentment towards grandma too. And so kind of thinking about it in that way, and just knowing that, like, you're making the best decision, you're doing your best, you're trying to learn and grow the best you can for your child, for your family. And not everyone's going to agree, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's true.
And if they're crossing boundaries, clearly, set expectations and set your boundaries, and be clear in communicating that. Hold the boundaries. But that's the way that I would, and you don't want it to be like a confrontational thing, but sometimes it, and I'm thinking about kind of the way that you describe, like, it's already a confrontational thing. Ideally, what you want is to be able to, again, have those conversations when grandpa's, they're saying you should just spank them, you just hit them. Oh, like, why do you say that? Oh, well, that's the way you're raised. Okay, well, and just having those conversations, and not judging the grandparents either, and giving them grace too, and maybe sharing a little bit about the research and a little bit of just like kind of like what you've learned, and hopefully they're open to it. And if you are, they're going to be more likely to be open to it if you're not judging them and shaming them. But to the point where they're kind of embarking on the journey a little bit too, and they're learning too, and you're giving them the books that you finished, or recommending the podcast, or sending them the videos too, right? Because there are definitely a lot of grandparents out there who did not raise their children in this gentle parenting way. Feels really like new and weird for them, like,
exactly.
As there's probably a lot of things for them, this changing world that's so different than what they grew up in, and also in where they were parenting even. But some grandparents are open, and so if you can get to that point, that's ideally the goal. But if you can't, then holding the boundaries. And one last thing I'd like to say on that, in the vein of parents, co-parents, grandparents, teachers, that you to buffer the effects, and I know this is something you know, to buffer the effects of trauma, you only need one healthy attachment figure, right? You only need that one person, right? And so if everyone in that child's life isn't doing the gentle parenting method, and I'm not, and maybe it's not, you're not like speaking about like trauma, but even if it can buffer the effects of trauma, that one strong attachment figure, that one healthy relationship with an adult, then it can buffer the effects of grandma using good jobs, actually, using good jobs for everything, right? And so just keeping that in mind, that not everyone in your child's life has to be on this gentle parenting journey and saying everything, doing everything, the quote unquote right way, science-based way, right? And hopefully knowing that, and that perspective can allow you to get in a place to relax and breathe, can step into curiosity, because it's not life or death. That if your grandparent says the one thing, or that it's not going to define your child's personality and give them a bunch of mental disorders or and whatnot, right? Focus more on your relationship and how to be that safe person with your child, so you can help them work through whatever, maybe grandma, grandpa, co-parent, whatever does do something. And if that happens, you want to be that safe person they can go to, so you can help them work through that, so you can buffer whatever negative effects could potentially come out of that.
What a wonderful way to finish this conversation. I think that's such an important point, where we're placing a lot of responsibility on everybody around us as well to follow the same kind of parenting, but focusing on ourselves, I think is a really important point to end off with. Thank you. Thank you for having this conversation with me. I'd love to give our listeners more information about you. Where can they reach you? How can they get help from you if they want extra help?
Yeah. And if you stayed with us this long, then you're really going to love the social media and the other stuff that I put out. So I'm on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I have my own podcast, and I offer coaching services. You can find me as Mr. Chaz, and it's Chaz with two Z's, MRCHAZZ, on all those social media platforms. It may look a little different. On Facebook, it's Mr. Chaz space Mr. Chaz. TikTok is Mr. Chaz, Mr. Chaz. Instagram is just Mr. Chaz. My podcast is Mr. Chaz's Leadership, Parenting, and Teaching Podcast. And you can get access to one-on-one coaching with me through www.patreon.com/Mr. Chaz. And that's where you can find me.
I will add all those links to your show notes for the podcast episode. Thank you. I have learned so much from you, and I enjoy your videos. Like you said, it's just, sometimes it just makes me think. And I love taking that moment to embrace that moment of thinking and having a perspective, and thinking about it differently, or it's just, they're wonderful. Thank you for everything that you do.
Yes. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for everything that you do as well. I don't think, and I think I put the episode out. I'm not sure. I think I put the episode out, but Cindy was on my podcast too. Yeah. So definitely check out that conversation. Yeah. We're talking about screen time. It was a really great conversation.
It was. Thank you.
Check me out. Check us out.
Thank you. Thank you, Chaz. Have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.